So we're going to take a look at the governor assembly for the Polyphon 43BG, and we're going to do some disassembly of this so that we can clean it up. Actually, I've already done a little bit and put it back together so that I could videotape the full process. So this governor assembly has been removed from the music box already, and we can see some parts of it. Of course, here are the governor wings, and this lever is the start-stop lever. You should be able to see the lever move here, pulling on this bar. There's a finger that goes behind this bar, and then we'll pull this bar out. It's spring-loaded, the spring being right here. And when the bar is pulled out, when the governor spins, this little catch, spring catch right here, will go past the bar. When it's pulled in, which is the stop position, and the governor spins, the spring-loaded finger will catch on the bar and stop the governor from turning. We can notice a couple of other things. Here's the screw gear, and then the other gears that will eventually engage the governor ultimately to the spring box and to the drive mechanism for the music box itself. One other thing I'll point out here, I have had this piece off and buffed it out already, but you'll see here we have some serious damage to the head of this screw. This was pre-existing based on somebody using an improper screwdriver. If you've done music boxes before, you know that in almost all cases these screws are a straight slot that's very thin, and the only type of screwdriver that should be used on these types of screws is what's called a hollow ground screwdriver. You should never use a regular tapered household or mechanic screwdriver. I have a set here. This is from Brownell's. Brownell is a manufacturer primarily of tools that are used for gunsmithing. And here's a close-up view of one of the tips of the hollow ground screwdriver, and you can see this is actually a bigger one than I would be using on this music box, or at least on these parts. But you can see how it's ground so that the part of the screwdriver bit that goes into the slot is perfectly flat. The taper doesn't start until it gets above the portion that would go in the screw slot. And the way to be sure you won't damage screws is to be sure and have the right sized hollow ground screwdriver bit. It should be the full width of the head of the screw and the same thickness as the thickness of the slot. So I'm videotaping this disassembly, and that will give me a really clear record of the reassembly process. If you weren't going to videotape it and you're not an expert at taking apart music boxes and putting them back together, you'll certainly want to take a lot of photos and maybe make some notes, but digital photos are probably the best record. So I have an appropriate screwdriver bit here, and I'm going to remove this screw that holds the lever in place that would pull the governor catch mechanism out that stops it. And so we have three components. We have the screw, we have the lever mechanism with the little finger, that's what will grab this arm. So there's that component. And then we also notice that we have a little piece of spring steel. That's to keep some tension on this so it doesn't slide back and forth. And you'll notice that this screw has actually a little hub or flange on it, so that the screw can be screwed all the way down into the bracket here and will not tighten the whole assembly up because of this hub here. And the spring steel piece will then keep pressure on this. This looks like it might be a reproduction that somebody made subsequent to the manufacture. I don't know, I haven't seen an original one before, but it's certainly a little bit crude. So just to recap the three pieces that we've taken off so far, we've taken off the screw that holds the shut-off arm assembly in place, and you'll notice again the screw has that little flange or hub on it that keeps it from screwing all the way down to over tighten the lever. And then we have the lever itself with the arm that will pull out the catch for the governor spring assembly, and then finally the little piece of spring steel that keeps pressure on the lever because the screw doesn't tighten itself all the way down. So those three things we've taken apart so far, and we'll set them aside. I wanted to point out what I'm using here is a bin box that I got at the local builder's supply, and it's got a bunch of divisions so I can put various parts in this box. I'm going to try to put them in the order that they come apart, and that'll make it a little bit easier to put everything back together again, and it will keep these parts from being mixed with parts from any other project I might have going. The next step we're going to do is start to remove some additional pieces from the governor assembly, and we're going to start on this side. Remember, this is the finger that pulls back and forth to either catch or not catch this little stop spring on the governor. Now this finger actually is inserted through a hole in the base, which you can see here, coming out here, and I don't know if you can see it in the picture, but that's actually pounded down so as to make this essentially a rivet. And so I'm not going to remove this finger itself because I don't want to destroy the end that's holding it in. I will next remove this spring that keeps tension on the finger so that it will go in when the pull latch is released. And so for that we have one screw here, and again I have a screwdriver bit that fits exactly into the slot of the screw, and so we can take that screw out without doing any damage to the head of the screw. So I'm going to remove that screw and the spring. I'll keep them together and put them in a separate bin. The next bin over in my little parts box, I have a parts box with bins so that I can keep things from becoming disorganized. Next, I'm going to remove the governor wing and spring assembly along with the worm gear or the endless gear here, and that comes off by removing one screw on the end, and again using the proper sized screwdriver bit, it fits totally in. That screw isn't actually very tight. Sometimes these are extremely tight. And so that comes off with the little cap piece that holds this in. And so that's going in the next bin. Now to actually complete the removal of this assembly, we will need to remove this little U-shaped brass piece that holds this end of the worm gear, because this end of the shaft fits into a hole in the bracket. So it's going to have to come out this way, and this is the removable piece. So we'll remove this screw and this screw to remove this brass piece. Now these pieces are well designed and quite durable. I've removed the two screws that I talked about that hold this little U-shaped bracket in place. I also noticed that there are a couple of little holes that I can see in these outside bars, and I understand that these bars have a little pin on each side that also holds this bracket, so while it can move, it won't come out at this point. So what I'm going to do is to loosen up these screws, not completely taking them out at this point if I don't need to. I don't know whether I will need to or not. Loosen these screws, and these are the screws that hold the two side pieces. They also hold the other gears together. With those loosened now, I can take out this U-shaped bracket, and one gear comes out, and also now we can remove the governor assembly with the endless screw and the governor wings and spring assembly. So I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to put the U-shaped bracket and its two screws into a separate bin. And now we've already removed one of these gears, and we'll have the video to look back at to see which way it goes, because I didn't notice. But we'll remove the remaining pieces here, and so the next gear, we'll get a little closer here. So the next gear that's going to come out, of course, is this big one, and in fact that's the only remaining gear. So since that's the only remaining gear, I can complete the removal of these screws, and that bracket comes off, and you'll see there's where the screw went, and there are the holes, pins that go into these two holes. So there's one bracket. We'll do the same thing with the other bracket. And there's the second bracket with its screw. I'll keep these screws paired. They're probably exactly the same, not custom made, but I'll keep them paired together. And then here we have the bracket assembly with nothing left attached to it except the lever that I talked about earlier that's really riveted in. And then we have the two gears that were in the assembly, and we have the two brackets. And at this point everything is disassembled that needs to be, and we would start the cleanup and buffing process. I'm going to put these materials into the bin in the next slot, both brackets and their screws separately, the two gears. The remaining main piece I will keep out for now because it doesn't need to go in the bin, it won't get lost. And take one more look at this point at the governor assembly, because we're going to want to do something. This is the governor fan and spring assembly along with the endless gear, and we're going to want to do something with this because it's got a lot of tarnish on it. It also needs cleaning, so we'll take a look at that after we do some work on the other components. In looking at the base a little bit more, I think it's going to end up being repainted, so what I want to do is just make note of the surfaces that would not be painted. And of course the arm would not be painted. This surface here that the upright plate's mounted to, and the corresponding surface on the other side would not be painted. Also, you can see, I think, if we look down in here, this surface here and the inside of this are not painted, and the back side, it looks like, probably actually is. Also, this top part where the slide bar mounts back and forth, it's a little unclear, but that probably doesn't need to be painted. And then on the main upright, again, a surface where there's going to be something else making contact, such as here, is probably not going to be painted, and it also looks like this side wasn't as well. So the rest of it is going to be painted, and so I'll clean that up by hand. I'm not going to use any kind of stripper on it. I'm not going to sandblast it. I'm just going to clean it by hand using tools like steel wool and a little hand Dremel type tool to remove that paint so it'll be ready to paint again. And of course this is a piece that is not visible when the music box is assembled and playing, so even the original finish is fairly rough, as the casting hasn't been really finished very finely. Alright, so here's the casting that holds all of the components of the governor assembly, and I have gone over it with a Dremel tool with a wire brush on it and removed really almost all of the paint. So now the next step will be to tape off those areas that I don't want repainted, and then we'll go ahead and spray paint that. I've made some progress on cleaning up these parts, and I just wanted to take an interim shot and show you what these two brass uprights, these, remember, are the pieces that serve as bearings for the gears and hold some of the assembly together. This is the one I've cleaned, and this is the one that I haven't worked on yet. It's primarily a cosmetic situation here. There's no damage, and these are brass, so there's no rust. So there is some sort of corrosion and a lot of dirt and discoloration. So I'm just cleaning those up to make them look good. And I've also finished already the little U-shaped piece, remember, that held the back end of the worm gear as a little bearing for that. So that's done. Also, as I was working on this project, I noticed that some of the screw heads, many of them were damaged, as I had noted before. And in looking at those and taking care of those, the only thing I did to the screw heads was where there was a burr on the top of the head from a screwdriver being forced into it and then twisted out because it was the wrong screwdriver, I did manually file those burrs down. What I've used for most of my polishing is a Dremel. I have a small brush. I need to get a large one. This is a wire brush. I use that particularly on the cast pieces. And then for some of the finer polishing now on the brass, I've been using this cloth buffing wheel. It's sort of falling apart. I'm going to see if I can't get a better one because this isn't a very satisfactory one. But I use this buffing wheel just with a regular buffing compound that I have for my larger grinder. And when I have a larger piece that I need to do, I will use the larger bench grinder to do some of that, but because these are small pieces and I'm trying to be very careful, most of it's being done with the Dremel tool. I'm going to turn my attention now to the worm gear, the endless gear, the spring catch, and the wings that actually comprise the governor. And this is all going to be cosmetic cleanup work. There's nothing really wrong with it that I know of, so we aren't going to actually do any repairs. And I've looked at these two brass plates that comprise the wings, and I want to get inside to clean up on the inside as well as the outside, and yet I don't want to do any damage. And so, having looked at this, I noticed that the springs are attached in two different ways. On one side, which was probably the first side that they would have attached when they made it, it's actually through the hole and then also twisted around itself. So that particular end of the spring is going to be quite difficult to remove. On the other hand, the other end of the spring simply went up through the hole and then is formed into a loop, which I think you can see there, the little loop. And I've started to open this loop up a little bit. I won't have to open it up very much, because with a little bit of twisting and pulling, I'll be able to get it out of the hole without opening it up all the way. Now I'm going to open it up just a little bit more with this very fine nose pliers. And that's enough then to detach the spring from the wing. And I'm going to leave it attached to the other one. Once I have these both undone, then I'll have easy access to all sides of the brass wing plates and the interior, and I'll be able to clean those up with much less danger of doing any damage. And I think I mentioned these are actually riveted here, so I'm not going to be taking that out because I don't want to make any new rivets, and I want to be very careful because I don't want to do any damage, because I don't want to have somebody make me a new governor or new components for the governor. So I'm going to go ahead and take that other spring off, and then I'm going to do some work on cleaning up this part of the mechanism. Just to show you now, I have both springs detached on the easy side, the side that's easy to detach, and so I have good access to both sides of these butterfly pieces. I can move them around as I need to so that I can have them supported on a flat surface as I do any cleanup work on them, and that certainly should minimize any damage fact, it should eliminate damage to the governor mechanism, and then it'll be all ready to go back in. The cleanup work is all done on the components for the governor, so I want to just take one last look at these components before we start to reassemble them. And so you'll remember in the order that we took things off, first of all was the little pull lever that engages and disengages the automatic or the shutoff, and this was the little spring clip that goes under it to keep it in tension, and then this is the bar, and of course there's the screw as well. So this is all polished up and ready to go. Then we had the little spring and the screw that goes with it, and remember that's the spring that keeps the little finger under tension when you release the lever to engage the stopping mechanism. And this was a little end plate that serves as a bearing for one of the gears. Moving on, we have the main governor assembly. This is the device that actually controls the speed by creating wind resistance. Also, there's the little spring that will catch to stop the governor and stop the machine at the end of the playing. This was the little U bracket that formed one end of the assembly that holds the gears in. And then moving on, we also have the two upright brackets, again, that will hold gears, and those also hold that little U-shaped end plate, and those are all polished up and ready to go. Then we have the two reducing gears that link the governor mechanism to the spring motor. These again are polished up. I was careful not to use any kind of electrical means of polishing on the gear teeth themselves. I didn't want to take any chance of damaging a tooth. We certainly don't want to have to make a new gear. We cleaned these up, starting with Brasso and some very fine steel wool. Also on the gear surfaces themselves, a toothbrush. And then on the smooth surfaces of the gears, not the teeth, but the area that you can mostly see, I did polish up with my Dremel tool and a little buffing head on that with some buffing compound. And then finally, the main bracket that holds the whole mechanism together. This, remember, I took apart, I cleaned up, I have painted it. Remember that I was going to mask off, and I did mask off certain areas here that were not previously painted, and they won't be painted in the future. So this is all ready to go, and we're now ready to start reassembling this governor mechanism.